And we are really delighted and honored today to have Reverend Dr. David Ault with us this morning. He did a workshop for us yesterday for a few of us, and as he said, they're maybe not be here because they're ascended now after the workshop. Although I guess I didn't get it because I was in the workshop and I'm still here. So I'm waiting on my ascension. Maybe after his talk today I'll get it, and we'll see. David, he shared with us yesterday, and in a very humorous way, that he was part of the very first New Thought boy band called Alliance back in the 1980s, and traveled extensively with Louise Hay for many years as her musical inspiration for her talks. And so that's how I first became aware of David and became a fan of Alliance and their music and the inspiration there. And David also songwriter, singer for many years. I've got his songbook somewhere in my stack of songbooks. I've threatened to bring them over and have him sign them for me if I can find them. I'm just not sure where they are. But yeah, and David is also a ordained minister in Centers for Spiritual Living. He has been the senior minister at Spiritual Living Center of Atlanta for several years now, and is all still serving in that capacity, right? It's a little bit different model that he's introduced there, which is pretty exciting. And, you know, everybody's trying to see how it's going to work for him before anybody else does it. So we'll see how that works out, and it sounds very exciting to me. But David is also the author of award-winning books. His latest, I think he's writing one now, but The Grass is Greener Right Here is one of his books that has won awards. And I think we have a few copies in the bookstore. There was some mix-up with Amazon, so we didn't get a supply of books today, but we have a few copies in our bookstore. But David is also founder of Kaleidoscope Child Foundation. Make sure I'm getting that right. Kaleidoscope Child Foundation. And his foundation is dedicated to child education and around the world for vulnerable children. And he has established two schools in Cambodia and has established another school in India. And he'll probably talk a little bit more about that. But really dedicated to education around the world. He's dedicated to social justice and equality and unity, and just really a man who I believe walks the talk and lives the truth that he teaches. And just really delighted to have David with us this morning, and I know you'll be blessed by his words.
All right, I'm going to ask you to do something that no one has ever asked you to do before. Are you ready? How many of you have a program? Does everybody have a program? Okay, I want you to get your programs. I want you to put your program, I want you to open it up and put it in front of your face. And just keep it there. Just keep it there. Hold it up. Everybody. I need to see everybody participating. If you don't have a program, take your hands and put them in front of your face. Okay. All right. So, how many know the expression, I can't see the forest for the tree? All right, so what you have in front of your face, whether it's a program or your hands, is the tree. Keep it up. The tree represents all of the issues, all of the anxiety and the problems and all of the things that are concerning you right now. It's what you woke up with this morning, trying to figure out how you're going to make it all happen, how you're going to pay for it. Who's going to get the children? How are you going to pay and get your taxes turned in on time? How are you going to manage the car payment, the car repair? How are you going to pay off the student loan? What are you going to do about the aches and pains that are presented to you in life? All of the things you want to add to this. Who else has a tree problem? All of the other stuff about paying the bills, about health, about concerns, about the political environment and everything else, all of that, oh my God, oh my God. Now, keep the program up. What do you know is beyond the page of the program or your hands in front of your face? Is there more out there? Is there more out there beyond the circumference of the page in front of your face? Is that a yes? Okay. So when you lower it down, voila, there is just so much more to see, correct? And what is available to be seen has always been there, right? And so what we come to realize is that we have options. And those options are, I can either be a tree person or a forest person. And my job this morning is try to convince you to embrace your forest nature. And by your forest nature, I'm simply talking about that whatever the tree issue is in the immediacy of your day-to-day life, that you unilaterally also understand that there's an entire forest of possibility out there. And what happens is that most of the time we become so consumed with the tree that we forget. Or we lay that down, or, this is really important, we cannot find other people who are willing to navigate and speak and talk and entertain forest conversations. But we can find a lot of people who can have tree conversations. In fact, have you noticed that most of our social hanging out, particularly when we go to meals with people, we're typically talking about what isn't working and the dramas around us and the aches and pains and who did what to who, and it's like a novella, right? We're constantly dining and ingesting and consuming food around the energy of what isn't working, rather than what would it be like, hold your breath, if you made agreements with people and said, at least once a week, if I'm going to go out to eat with you, we're only going to talk about what's working. And a hush fell over the room. We're only going to talk about solution. We're only going to talk about unexplored options. We're only going to set the stage in order to use these spiritual principles that we profess to believe in, and we're going to tangibly bring them to the surface and converse with them and intertwine energetically with them. And as we consume food, we're going to consume that as well. And we're going to walk away from these interactions uplifted and anticipatory about wanting to get together again because it was so thrilling and so healing and so vibrant and so enthusiastic. And I believe that it is our responsibility to gravitate more to becoming forest people than to tree people. How many of you might be interested in navigating your way to become forest people rather than tree people? A few of you. Okay, good. Because, I just took a photo out of my little lapel camera, and I know who raised their hands and who did not. So what does it take to be a forest person? I think like anything else, it takes practice. Because we are often told that we are spiritual beings having a human experience. And that famous Teilhard quote, I used to love because for me it felt like, that explains all of my faults. That explains all of my aspirational goals and yet my inability to meet them. And as I've grown older, I've decided that I don't resonate with that quote anymore. There's nothing wrong with it, but I feel a more accurate depiction of that quote is, I'm a spiritual being having a spiritual experience. But my spiritual experience is predicated on degrees of awareness, degrees of practice, degrees of being a forest person as opposed to being a tree person. And the more that I cultivate my spirituality, the more that I make a value out of self-awareness, and by value, and this is one of the things we explored yesterday in the workshop, is that if I came up to you and I said, tell me your top 5 values, would you be able to do that? Because your values determine what you say yes and what you say no to. Your values determine whether or not you are sincere about being a forest person than just merely navigating your way through mass consciousness being a tree person. And I feel that those of us who are in this room know this already, and like myself, am constantly having to be reminded. Am constantly being given the opportunity to understand that the realities and the manifestations and the energies that I spend my time and I give my value to is determined by my ability to notice and cultivate my spirituality. I am a spiritual being. You are a spiritual being. And you are having a spiritual experience. But your spiritual experience is unfolding in degrees of your participation, in your degrees of devotion, in degrees of your willingness to wholeheartedly give yourself over to the discipleship of self-awareness. And as I continue to do this work, one of the things that I often call forth is I continue to be teachable. I continue to operate and navigate in the world with beginner's mind. There's nothing more dangerous than for all of us to show up in environments and say, I know that already. Because with beginner's mind, what we really begin to understand that in that forest, I love this, in that forest are solutions that you and I have never even tapped into. I was telling the people yesterday that one of my favorite thoughts, and I think it a lot, I like to think this thought, and that is, there are key people in my spiritual journey that I haven't even met yet. Don't you love that? And I want to keep saying that even when I'm 80 and 90 and on. I want to say, there are key people in my spiritual journey that I haven't even met yet. So one of the things that this philosophy teaches us is that everything happens twice. Everything happens twice. What does that mean? The first time that it happens is in mind, in consciousness. There is the thought about something, and we know that thought is creative, and that thought is energy, and that energy travels, and that traveling of that energy goes, and it attaches and magnetizes itself to things that are in vibrational harmony to the thought itself. And once it attaches and it magnetizes and draws forth that thing, then the thing that we thought first, the thing that happened in mind first, then happens in physical manifestation. Everything happens twice. That's called the creative process. That's what mental science principles are built around. That's what the founders of unity and divine science and religious science and all of the other new thought philosophies brought forth for us. It is the thing that you and I are offered to become devoted to and to practice to. It is the thing that has no finish line. No finish line. There is no finish line. There is no boundary to the forest. I often tell people that sometimes when we are tree people, when we are singularly focused or we become siloed in our spirituality and we act habitually, it's like going to spiritual Costco. Do you have Costco here in Denver? I love Costco, right? But I want you to imagine spiritual Costco, because spiritual Costco is endless. Just imagine, right? All the toilet paper you can buy. No. Spiritual Costco has aisles and divisions and departments that you will never get to because it's boundless. So I want you to imagine that such a place exists. That's the forest, right? And we go and we pull up and we walk into spiritual Costco. But what happens is that because we are mostly gravitating toward a tree mentality, that we go down the same aisle and we buy the same thing. That's the same conversation that we're having with people. That's the same problems and issues that we continue to present out into the world. One of the greatest heartaches, and I mean this sincerely, one of the greatest heartaches as a minister that I had to really look at is to view and to entertain on the people that come in Atlanta every week, those who year after year show up with the same issues. Because I take that personally, and I take that personally intentionally, because I go, what is not being disrupted in their spiritual Costco shopping? What is not happening? What is not reaching them in order for them to understand that there are infinite aisles for them to go and explore? What is not disrupting the conversation about ain't it awful and this person did this to me and I can't succeed because this outside entity has more power than my mind? And if everything happens twice, then as I continue to think the thought that I am helpless to this external force, then guess what? I will always be helpless to this external force. And so this principle, these spiritual concepts, this science around our mental philosophy is unrelenting. Just like that ringtone. It's unrelenting because it's trying to get our attention to remind us that it is our inherent nature. Anything that is inherent will not be denied. Right? It is an inherent nature for a dog to do what? To bark, sniff, do all of those things. It's their inherent nature, and it doesn't matter how much domestication is imposed upon that animal, its inherent nature will do what it's designed to do. You are designed for what? You are a spiritual being having a spiritual experience. That is your inherent nature. Hear me when I say it will not be denied. And when Ralph Waldo Emerson said that the universe conspires in our favor, conspires to get our attention, guess how it gets most of our attention? With that cosmic 2x4 that reminds us, hey, you're being a tree person and not a forest person. You might want to look at that. And so as I continue to surrender myself in beginner's mind, my thing around that is that as long as I'm in this skin suit, and as long as I'm understanding that my aim is to be a forest person, then I want to take these principles and I want to go out into the world. So, as Reverend David mentioned, I have these schools in Cambodia, and it took me many, many, many years to cultivate that. I believe the last time I was here, I may have spoken about that. But we expanded, and we expanded probably in a country that is one of the most challenging and most beautiful and most chaotic and most just all over the map, sensory overload countries and places I've ever been to, and that's India. And I've been in India for much of March, and I just got back a couple of weeks ago, and where we have these after-school programs, and we've been in the slums in the Bihar region, which is just below the Nepal border. And to be in these slums, working with lower caste children. Now, in India, I'm sure you probably heard that they used to have this regimented caste system. The Brahmins were at the top of the caste, and the untouchables were at the lowest. And then right above the untouchables is the lower caste, which has several divisions. The untouchables are usually the people that would deal with the cremation and the dead bodies and the sewage. And then the lower caste people, they were just born into that, and they were denied rights and privileges. If you were born into a lower caste, you were not able to learn how to read and write. If you were born in a lower caste, you could not go outside until certain hours of the day to get what you needed to feed your families or to cook the meals. And that's just the way that the system operated, because the rest of those hours in the day were reserved for the Brahmin. And even though that system is supposedly dismantled now, the mindset is still there, right? So even though you and I might have left situations that were unpleasant or disruptive or abusive, sometimes when we have not done our forest work, those attitudes and those concepts and those allegiances are still within us. And so it's fascinating to be with some of these people in the slums, particularly the parents, because they are the offspring of grandparents and great-grandparents who were run by this particular caste system. And here we have these children who have illiterate parents that have nothing in these slums, that are the first generation that are realizing that they deserve to have an education. Those children are naturally, inherently forest mindsets. Their parents are tree people. So most of the work isn't actually with the children, it's with the parents. It's convincing these parents that their child deserves an education. It's talking to them and explaining to them by allowing their child to come and to study that what they are doing is they are setting forth a whole new circumstance generationally for their village and for their people and for their country. And it's something to navigate your way through that, through the immense poverty, and to look at the resiliency of the child that still hasn't been tainted or told that they can't do it, but to try to convince that to those who are older. And I look at our own lives like that. Do you remember that time when we were pure and we were innocent? You realize that that's still within us. That forest nature or that spirituality, that purity, that inherent nature is still within us. That which is a spiritual being having a spiritual experience has never diminished or gone. It's just that we've allowed ourselves to veil those things over and over again. And as we age, and as we hopefully become more curious and more willing, we begin to set aside all of the things that told us that it wasn't possible. We begin to question all of the voices and all of the domestication in our family environment and in our social construct that said or criticized what it is that we were aiming to do. And we come back to this place. We come back to this place of searching and wanting most of the time because we're in pain. One of my teachers long ago said that people show up in church for two reasons. One is for inspiration and one is for desperation. And he goes, it's always interesting to look at what the quota is. But what I know is that the more that we begin to understand and question our own devotion around what is ours to do, then we can begin to reacquaint ourselves with the forest mentality that has never left us. One of the people that I studied when I was in ministerial school was a man by the name of Thomas Troad. Any of you ever heard of Thomas Troad? Thomas Troad was an Englishman who was a judge actually in Punjab, India. And he did that work for many, many years until he retired. But what happened with Thomas Troad is that his inquisitive nature, his inherent nature became so strong as he began to look at mental science principles around healing, that in his intelligence, he began to study and to write down how do these principles, how does this science work? He was the first person to actually talk about that mental science creative process and the one to actually put it into words. He did a series of lectures in Edinburgh, Scotland in the early 1900s in a tea house, and reports say that no one knew what he was talking about. But he was so devoted to this, and I became a lover of Thomas Troad simply because he explained to me the science behind what it means to be a forest person. The science behind what it means that my thoughts are creative and that everything really does happen twice. And he didn't have a lot of fans during his lifetime, except for one woman. Her name was Genevieve Brand, and she was a Parisian woman that had somehow gotten a hold of his writings and became just an ardent fan immediately. And Genevieve Brand soaked up Thomas Troad's writings, and one passage in particular and see if you can resonate with this. This is what Genevieve Brand loved. Thomas Troad said, "My mind is a center of divine operation. The divine operation is always for expansion and fuller expression. And this means the production of something beyond what has come before." Let me read that again. My mind is a center of divine operation. The divine operation is always for expansion and fuller expression, and this means the production of something beyond what has come before. It's that last part that I believe really excited Genevieve, because she said the production of something beyond what has come before means then that this life is evolutionary. That regardless of how old I get, I will never fully explore the forest. She became obsessed by that quote. That quote became her mantra. That quote became her written affirmation, so much so that she decided that she was going to travel to England, where Thomas Troad had now gone back and home and retired, and become his student. So she wrote him. She said, "Hey, love your work, and want to come study with you." And he said, "Don't do that. Don't teach. I'm retired. I'm just writing." And she said, "No excuse. I'm coming." He said, "No, I don't do that." In today's world, we would call it stalking. But I want to show you the depth of an individual's devotion. She would not take no for an answer. And she went and she found how much it would cost for her to sail, because by this time she was in America, how much it would cost to sail to England. And I think it was somewhere around, not just to sail, but to find housing and to live in England for a year, because she had already formulated in her mind that that's about how long it would take for her to study with Thomas Troad. So she came up with $20,000, which was a lot in the early 1900s. She did not have $20,000. So she took this quote, "My mind is a divine operation," and she began to visualize $21,000 bills being handed to her like this, just being handed to her. And every single day, in her forest mentality, she would see that. And the truth is that actually happened. That people came, and through circumstances, she was given this $20,000, and she took it and she booked her passage to England, and she showed up on his front door. And he had no other choice but to take her as a student, because he was so impressed by that. Today we would call it stalking. But he did. He taught her, and she was the only student, the only live student of Thomas Troad. But what I loved about that story, and what I love about Thomas Troad's work that is still relevant today, is that that principle has no age. It has no expiration date. It doesn't tire. It doesn't become irrelevant. But it is the constant relevancy of what is ours to do. And when you look at these people who become so devoted to their own personal growth, what does that do for you and I? I think sometimes it can irritate us because we have so much self-doubt, and sometimes it can inspire. And I'm hoping that today what it does for us is it inspires us to some degree to be able to consider the fact that our destiny, our inherent nature, is to understand that everything happens twice. And that what has happened up until this point is not the fault of anyone else. That's the biggest healing right there. What has happened up until now is no one else's fault, but it is simply a product of the way in which we have used and worked with energy, the way in which we've used consciousness up until now. And if we don't like something, if we're displeased with something, are we willing to begin to find ways to change our relationship with the way in which we think. So I'll leave you with one exercise that we did yesterday. I believe that everything is a gift. Everything is a gift. Worry is a gift. Did you know that? Worry is a gift. How many of you think that worry is a bad thing? Don't worry. And here's what I know about stuff like this. When I say don't do something, you're like, I want to see what I'm not supposed to do. And so when I'm teaching and I have my students and I say, they go, well, we're not supposed to worry, then you're actually worrying. Don't think about the white elephant in the room, then you're thinking about the white elephant in the room. So what if all of those things are actually stimulus? And that stimulus are gifts. The things that are irritants that we want to go away, but what would happen if the clam never allowed the irritant of the sand to transform into a pearl? And so everything then is designed to support us to be a forest person. So here we go. What do we worry about? How many times do you worry? How many of you are Olympic champion worriers? Okay? And so when we worry, this is the key thing. Notice it. Notice it the moment that it happens. The moment that I am worrying about not having enough time, not having enough money, not having enough resources, not having enough wisdom, not having enough support, whatever that lineage of worry might be, notice it and consider this. That worry has a polarity. Do you know what a polarity is? An opposite. That worry, if I'm worrying about not being able to pay for something, that worry has a polarity, meaning that there is more than enough out there in that forest principle of thinking that I haven't even availed myself of. And if everything happens twice, if I don't take the opportunity of noticing what I'm worrying about and move to its polarity and go, thank you, worry, this is what I'm going to focus on, then my mind will do what? It will only stay in the stagnation of that worry, and that thing will come to pass. It will be a self-fulfilling prophecy. It will happen twice. But if I use worry as a gift, as a tool, and I go, oh, look at me, I'm worrying. Isn't that sweet? Isn't that cool? Look at the universe trying to get my attention. Look at the universe tapping me on the shoulder and say, hey, you got an inherent nature in there. It's a forest thing. Come on over here. So I take what it is that I'm worrying, and for a few moments, I simply move it over, and I begin to think and to absorb and to see and to feel what it would be like for this thing that I'm worrying about to be a non-issue. To be a non-issue. What would it feel like if money was never an issue? What would it feel like if this particular diagnosis was self-regulating itself and moving me into a more vibrant state of being? What would it be like if, what would it feel like if, what would the experience of this be, feel, have, do like if I changed my relationship to it? What would be the outcome? So if we are going to subscribe to these unity principles, isn't this our responsibility? Isn't this what we are destined and called to do? Isn't this what we have been put in physical form to experience? In order to bring to light that transcension energy, to understand and know that everything is operating for our favor. All things are working together for our good, to them that love the law being the law of mind, to them that are called according to the purpose of the use of that law. So where are we using the law? Where are we using this law of mind and going, wow, look at this great opportunity? So I walk into the slums of India and I think, how in the world am I going to do this? How in the world am I going to build a school here? Which I feel called to do. And I go and I talk to various people, and it's interesting because then I'm in Delhi and I'm talking to these very well-off financial Indian business people, and they're telling me, don't waste your time. They're telling me it's of no use, and you'll only you won't get a return on your investment and all of this kind of stuff. And I realized that the people who are speaking to me are Brahmins that have no understanding whatsoever of what it feels like to be in the position of having lived generationally in a lower caste system. You and I are Brahmins spiritually, but sometimes the degree by which we're living it is in a very lower caste demonstration. That's the degree. And what we are called upon to do is to consider and to understand and know, can't focus on the tree. I'm going to acknowledge the tree. I'm going to say, hi, tree, I see you. Hi, worry, I see you. I'm not going to bury my head in the sand and practice this sort of spiritual bypass denial. No, I'm going to acknowledge that you're there, but I'm also going to acknowledge unilaterally that there is a forest out there. And just like streams of water flow down the mountain and hit a rock or hit a barrier, they just go around it and they keep going down, going to the source. And you and I, we will hit all kinds of trees and we will go around it and we will continue on the trajectory toward the greater fulfillment of being spiritual beings, having a full spiritual experience. And so it is. Thank you.